It's a question that comes up with every wipe. Is the Bitcoin farm worth it? Now, the Bitcoin farm and everything around it are some of the more complex systems in the game. The math on how it generates Bitcoins is far from straightforward. The prices to build it are always fluctuating. And to top it all off, the Bitcoin in the game is tied to IRL Bitcoin. So it swings and changes with the volatility of that, making it even harder to tell if things are valuable. The good news is that despite all of this, the answers are still pretty straightforward. Even with BSG recently buffing the price of Bitcoin, basically doubling it. Now, along with this, graphics cards tend to track with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up in price because it does an IRL or because BSG changes things, graphics cards go right along with it. And this is an issue because graphics cards are the single biggest expense in the Bitcoin farm itself. And because of that, even big changes in the price of Bitcoin don't end up changing the final outcome of whether the Bitcoin farm is worth it or not. Now, there are two schools of thought here, and I'll provide numbers for both, but let me explain them just so everybody's on the same page. The first thought process, if you will, being along the lines that you need to include fuel in the cost of the Bitcoin farm, and not some of it, all of it. The Bitcoin farm bears the total cost of fuel. I don't agree with this, but some folks are absolutely adamant about it, so we'll include it in our discussions here. Now, the other school of thought, the one that I go with, is that the cost of fuel is shared by everything else in the hideout. Now, with that, if you mix in the fact that the sheer variability in price of fuel based on whether you barter for it, you find it in raid, you get it really cheap, whatever it might be, which fuel you use, all of those make it basically worthless to try to include fuel in the cost because it's different for everybody. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front here, not just that the Bitcoin farm is worth your time, but why you'd be silly not to build it. At least to level 1, get the level 1 module up and get cards in it. Everybody should be doing that for the most part. So instead of me burying all this at the end of the video and making you watch through a bunch of numbers if you're not interested in it, I'm going to give you the answers right up front. So can I ask a favor of you? Can you like, maybe even subscribe? Throw a comment down below talking about what you're building it to and why. All of that helps out the video a ton because if you don't watch the whole thing, and I don't expect you to, but the YouTube algorithm cares a lot about watch time. And that's why a lot of creators put stuff at the end, but I'm gonna put it up at front to save you time if you want it. Just do me a favor and at least throw a like down there below. So with that, let's expand a little bit on that answer specifically, the answer that everybody should build a Bitcoin farm. And this applies to level 1, of course. So if you buy everything for the Bitcoin farm, don't even include finding your cards in raid or non-found in raid ones or whatever. If you buy all of your cards, the Bitcoin farm 1 full of 10 cards pays for itself in like 7 to 10 days. Now, this doesn't include the cost of fuel. So after that week and a half, whatever it might be, essentially what happens is you get a free Bitcoin about every 40 hours. Now, if you take into cost of fuel, if you're in that school of thought, you're probably one of those people that are not going to build the Bitcoin farm anyways, but we'll mention it. The break-even point for that, if the Bitcoin farm is taking all of its costs in, it is 75 days to break even. So it still will break even. It just takes, a little 2.5 months, give or take. Now, as a side benefit to having the level 1 farm, the thing that's good about this is that if you find a non-found in raid card, you don't find a non-found in raid, but let's say you find a card in raid, you stick it in your secret container, you die, that card is now only worth about 127,000 rubles. But if you take that and stick it in your Bitcoin farm, it completely changes the math on this. Because right now I'm running graphics cards at like 430,000 to come up with all these numbers. And if that's all you're sticking into your Bitcoin farm is cards that are found in raid like that you die with, the break-even point gets down to like 5, 6, maybe 7 days, depending on how many there are there. So that's why I say the level 1 farm is for everybody and you should take the time because the payoff is really short. And you don't have to log in every day to collect your coins because I'll hop in right here and I'll show you guys. If you look, you get 3 coins, right? And at 40 hours, that means it's 120 hours. That's damn near a week that so you got to collect once a week, maybe like every 6 days, 5.5, whatever it might be, and then not have to worry about missing out on coins. And even at 10, that goes to 30 hours. So now you're 90 hours. So that's what, 4 days, give or take. So twice a week. Start of the weekend, end of the weekend, however you want to do it. And that's why it works for everybody. Now, the level 2 farm, which is where I'm at 25 cards, that's for pretty much anybody who's going to play all wipe or most of the wipe. So if you're one of those players that only plays for a couple of weeks or maybe a month and a half, and then you give up on Tarkov for the rest of the wipe, and that's fine. I'm not being critical of that. The level 2 might not be for you. At 25 cards, it takes a little over a month to break even with all the costs that go into this. Again, this is without fuel. With fuel, that's pushed up to about 67 days. But even then, you're still breaking even after that with fuel costs. But if you're one of those players who's playing all wipe and you're not crafting to offset your fuel costs, simple things like the super water, 1 craft in each of your modules that's good for profit, or even if you're crafting ammo, all of those are going to share your fuel cost, if you will. The best part of this is after you pay off, this thing generates 330,000 rubles a day, give or take, with Bitcoins at about 285K. Now, the level 3 farm, this is a completely different ball game. And not just because you need the really fancy part, because you have to build solar to get the level 3 farm, which is why I don't have it, but you need this part here, the far forward current converter. And the only two ways to get this are by getting way down the Lightkeeper task line or finding it on labs, which makes it pretty hard for a lot of people to do. I haven't been able to find one yet. I'm lucky that I got my intel done. So aside from that, the cost to get a level 3 Bitcoin farm by itself, just these components right here, this is almost 24 million rubles, including the cards. And I include the cards because if you're gonna build a level 3 Bitcoin farm, you better buy all your cards and fill this thing up, because you're just leaving money on the table if you don't, if you're going this far to build this thing anyways. Now, that 24 million doesn't include the solar power. And I'll talk about that in a second, and there's a reason for that. But that's just the cost to upgrade the Bitcoin farm 1, 2, and 3, and then all 50 cards. Now, after this pays itself off after about 48, 50 days, you're gonna make over 500,000 rubles a day from the level 3 farm. That's a ton of money. Now, I don't count the solar cost in this because solar by itself, and we'll show you the charts for it, solar by itself pays for itself in the fuel savings in like 2 months, maybe say 2.5, because hideout management makes it slow down a little bit in how fast it saves you money, but it pays for itself. So I completely exclude it from this equation because I don't count fuel either. Now, if you're like me and you've had your level 2 built for a while, mine's already well paid itself off because, one, I got most of my cards at like 300K or less, or 280 before Bitcoin got leveled, which was a huge bonus for me. I'm going to get 3 eventually. And it might take me another 2-3 weeks, but I'm going to go after it. I'll get it done. I don't care how many labs raids I got to run to do it. The break-even point for me at this point, just the cost of upgrading level 3 and buying all 25 of my cards at like 430K. Let me look here. We'll just look in the video just to make sure so you guys can see where we're at as of making the video. 430, 440, 450, kind of expensive, whatever. But regardless, it only takes 36 days for all of these costs to break even, including an extra 25 cards. And then it's fully paid because the level 2 paid for itself. Now you just got to use a level 3 to pay for that little pie. So looking at like that, I've only got about a month and a week, 5 weeks, if you will, to pay off the level 3, and then it's the rest of the wipe. It's doing good. Now we'll talk about some of the numbers here a little bit so that you guys can see how I came to some of my conclusion, things like that. This spreadsheet's available. I do stuff like this all over my Patreon all the time. We talk about it. My Patreon's over there. Not only that, I do weekly crafting guides, and we talk about all sorts of stuff, economy updates, the whole 9 yards. So if you're interested in that stuff, go check out the Patreon, or if you just want to support me in making this kind of content, because it does. That is the best place to support me, is Patreon. YouTube takes 45%, Twitch takes 50%, whatever it might be. The Patreon is the best place to support me if that's something you're interested in. If not, you're free. These videos are free as always, and I'm not going to stop making them just because I have my Patreon running. Now, this spreadsheet is what I use to calc everything out, and this is available. The link will be down in the description. Just make sure when you go to get the file, make sure you save a copy or make a copy. Don't request access. I'm not going to give you access to it because that means you can edit it for everybody else. So save a copy. You can use it yourself. It'll copy all the formulas over. Let me zoom this out just a touch. So right now, what I plugged in here is 430,000 for graphics cards, 285,000 for Bitcoin, which is roughly where we're at. And like I said, you can come in here and change all these prices you want. Anything yellow is kind of the places you want to change stuff. The number of cards is right here. So if you want to look at level 1 Bitcoin farm and 10 cards, you put 10 in, and it shows you right here your level 1 farm, weeks, days, hours, how long it takes you to break even. And then over here, I have all the calculations based on how many cards you have, how much it makes, all of that kind of stuff. Up top, these boxes are your costs to upgrade. So the T plug, like if you want to say T plugs are 23,000, you can just plug it in here and it'll automatically update across everything else. So if you're getting them cheaper or they're more expensive because things change, that's all the way including solar power. Right now, solar power is counted in the spreadsheet. I will leave it that way. If you don't want to count solar power, just come over here and change that to 0, and it'll fix all the equations down here. But as you can see, at 50 cards, whoopsies, put 50 cards in. Here's your level 3 Bitcoin. And if you want to add fuel, you can do it here. We'll put 167,000 in. That's what I used for fuel calcs on the numbers I was giving you earlier, because that's what Jaeger sells it at. And it updates everything down here for your costs. If you don't want fuel, just put 0. Now this automatically, the level 3 farm automatically takes into account the solar power reduction, the 50% reduction, because you have to have the solar power to do level 3. So that is not counted in anything else. So if you have solar power and 2, you just cut your cost in half, change this to like 88,000, and then the numbers will be pretty close to the same. Now, as far as the solar power calculation, it's the next tab on here, same kind of deal. All of the equipment prices going into here. You can put your fuel cost, and then it'll just spit it out and tell you how many weeks it takes for the solar to pay for itself. 54 days, as you can see, with 166,824, and all the costs, including the far forward current converter. If you get out of labs, and that's the cost. That's what it's worth if you sell it to therapist. The barter is much more expensive, so keep that in mind. But that pretty much covers it. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope it makes you make the decision on what you're going to do with your Bitcoin farm. Have any questions? Throw them down in the comments. I do my best to answer what I can. I'm going to try not to get in any arguments with people, because it's kind of just beating my head against a brick wall. But you do what you want to do. This is just my take on it. But I appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget about the like and subscribe and all that fancy jazz stuff, because it helps me out a ton. Appreciate you guys watching. Wish you the best of luck in your raids, and we'll see you in Tarkov.